Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Most are afraid of unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat, and with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Fate for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other worlds. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
Other worlds were created and destroyed ere this present one was decided on as a permanent one. The Midrash Genesis Rabbah. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Momentary Zen here on Revolution Radio. We come to you every Wednesday evening, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, here on Studio B. I thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. I have as special guest my friend Gary Wayne. Gary, are you there, brother?
I am, and so happy to be back with you again, Zen. It's been a while.
It's an honor. It's always a pleasure to share time and space with you. I do want to give you a chance to tell people where they can go to find and locate your work. And I believe you're very proficient, prolific at, writing and doing blogs and updating different things. And so let people know where they can go to find all of your, current interviews and all of what you do. Gary, you there? Gary. Okay, it seems like we've lost Gary, so when he returns, we'll get that information. But anyways, this evening we're going to be talking about and covering the different aspects of the feathered serpent, the worldwide antediluvian worship of the feathered serpent, the dragon, seraphim, angels, and tie it together with some of the other cultures that not a lot of people know about, have heard about, and Gary's done a lot of great research in this area, and so once we connect with him, we'll get him to elaborate. And also I'm going to talk about, because so many people are still very interested in the antediluvian times, and also how the rebel angels were involved in the establishment of even the Atlantean mythologies and the prior times, all of that. And there's also a lot of interest in the two aspects of the differences in the creations, that of, in my opinion, what is pre-Adamic humanity and that of modern humanity, which is the last 6,000 years and previous to all of that. And so when we can get Gary on, we'll elaborate further on all of this. But there seems to be a lot of study in this regard, and I know that one of the collections of mythology and the foundation that a lot of people go to for understanding on some of this is the Sumerian mythology. And it's my opinion that it's difficult to really come to terms with truth when you are studying the pagan mythologies from whichever culture, especially that of the Sumerians, because there's been purposeful deception and disinformation encoded into all of that. And so, unless one is grounded in discernment and able to see what is false and what isn't, it's very easy to get led astray and to get confused on what happened in the ancient past and how it ties together with the inspiration of the gospel. And for those of you that know what I'm talking about, as far as that have done your own research, that have done your own study, and that who have opened yourself um, to looking into all things, you know that the scriptures, even though there's a lot of people that hate and don't believe or buy into, um, as far as what's written in the gospel, there it's 100% prophetic. And anybody that looks into, examines, and studies this for themselves, you can confirm that the Bible is the holy, inspired word of the Most High God. And that the prophecies that are encoded into it, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and much of the extra biblical books, that these things, these prophecies, this foresight, this premonition, have been foreshadowed for thousands of years. And that some of the prophecies, like that of Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay, that that prophecy associated with the various kingdoms, um, the Babylonians, the Media Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, and then the divided 10 kingdoms. All of that was, it played out over thousands of years. And so we're still trying to bring Gary on, but hopefully we'll get him very soon. But anyways, when you look at, again, you look at some of these prophecies, and much of them were written for the latter generation, with us, for us as the, what Enoch describes as that remote generation far into the future, a distant generation, that we are that generation, the fig tree generation, because it is for us that, I would say, at least a third of scripture is written about the end of days. And so we're seeing all that unfolding even now and coming to light even as we speak. There's like so many books and secrets now being revealed, so much information coming to the forefront to challenge all that we thought we knew of truth and all that we had just accepted as understanding. And this, as far as the deception, the delusion, it's all encompassing. The things that we have been lied about, deceived upon, we are discovering daily just how wide and how deep and how full those deceptions really are. And so, when you come to recognition as to the strangeness of the reality that we are contending with as people in this living in these times, you recognize that we have to really question ourselves about everything and reconsider all possibilities. And so, it makes it very interesting with regard to what um, what we have to relearn and what we have to reassess as a people. And basically, it's like we have to throw everything out the window and then doubt everything that we've already been indoctrinated into. And that we also have to realize that the matrix is such that we have been really brainwashed in every way, and in ways that we never even considered. And that as children growing up in the educational system, we think that we are um, that we're learning truth and that we're gaining an education which has some basis in reality, and that is preparing us for the future, preparing us for how to live in the world and how to really contend and survive. And yet what we really come to find out is that we have been groomed only to be little worker bees, little soldiers in the hive and for the hive. And as far as Hollywood and the glorification of war, the whole establishment as far as patriotism. Gary, you there, brother?
I am. We've had a massive power outage, so I've had to convert over to cellular here to connect back in.
Okay, well, you sound, it still sounds good. So,
That's
but
good. Just
anyways,
a
yeah.
little dark, but
Okay, right on. Well, hey, we appreciate you, doing whatever you had to do to come in. And I was just basically talking about our indoctrination and how, as humanity, we have been really brainwashed, and that the educational system is only to make us good little worker bees and tax-paying um, citizens, and that all of that has been established to really to lead us astray and to deceive us and separate us from God. But if you would, can you give out your website and your blogs and where people can go to follow and study and keep up with your work?
absolutely. So my website is www.genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6, the number 6, conspiracy.com. And on there, you can get a hold of me through email. You can also connect to my social media sites as well. You can also purchase a signed copy from that book, and I've got generous excerpts of every chapter on the book. And you can follow me on Facebook under Gary Wayne, and I have 2 Genesis 6 conspiracy pages. And then recently, somebody has set up a group called the Gary Wayne Genesis 6 Conspiracy Group, and I'm posting regularly in there and monitoring and commenting there regularly. And you can follow me on Twitter as well, at Gary Wayne63, at Gary Wayne63.
Very cool. Well, before we move into, because I want to ask you a little bit about the antediluvian and prior times, but before we do so, is there anything of interest, anything that that you think would be fascinating or interesting to share with the listening audience as far as some new discovery or anything that you've come across?
Well, nothing that's new. I mean, I put out a post recently about the lion men of Moab and
Oh,
lion
fascinating.
imagery, just in this last week, and I had not. I've always looked at that, and I've never made that connection that there might be a second race of giants out there that have that lion sort of distinction, as opposed to the serpent distinction that most of the Nephilim and the bloodlines are concerned with. And you think about, the lion imagery as also being right in there in tandem with snake and serpent and dragon imagery that goes with the royal imagery, from all the way through history right up to modern times. And it makes sense that that would be part of it. And so I was able to sort of connect, the Hebrew word of Eri and Ariel that goes back
Mm-hmm.
to lion, and to an angel that is recorded in mysticism of the Jews and the Kabbalism, and called Ariel, which is also
Mm-hmm.
meaning the lion of God. And so anyways, I put out a post, and I've also put it on your website, Eyes Wide Open, as well, so if anybody's interested in that. And I thought there might be a connection there in the past, but until recently, I didn't really put enough of the details together to suggest that there might be another group. And I also have pictures of some of these images of these lion-type men throughout history, and there's several names for them in Mesopotamia and other locations around the world. And it's just interesting that there is this sort of hint of a legacy that we can connect back to, the first chronicles of the Gadite lion men that were Gibberim, and the linemen of Moab that are killed also in the time of David, at the time when David is destroying giants.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. There's a book called As It Came to Pass, which talks about the a lot of the ancient stories associated with both David and Solomon. And there's many short stories and like ancient passages. I think some of these stories are based on Arabic texts and some of these ancient translations from other cultures, which talk about the lion men of Moab. And it's also interesting that when you study Maccabees 4, which talks about the story of, I believe it's Eleazar the high priest and his 7 sons and his wife, that the king is trying to force them to eat food sacrificed unto idols. And she encourages each of them to hold steadfast to their faith and to undergo the torture and to not give in. But anyways, why I bring that particular text up is that the torture that is being committed against them is done by these lion men of Moab.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Which
that's a
is,
fascinating story as well.
yeah, and that goes quite a bit, closer, almost 1,000 years, let's say 800 years or 900 years after David, and you still get this sort of repetition of
Right.
these linemen. And it's also interesting that, if you look at King Richard Plantagenet, known as King Richard the Lionheart, with a Plantagenet bloodline of one of the major European dynasties, taking that sort of name. And I know history calls it as he was such a brave warrior, but they just didn't take names out of just sort of small coincidences. They generally took their nicknames and things like that to represent sort of their history and their legacy. And in the ancient Sumerian language, there's the Urmalulo, if I pronounce it right. It's Urmahlulo, and they were a ruthless warrior lion race of ancient Sumeria, and even on the other side of the flood, as it turns out. And these linemen warriors are recorded in Babylon and Akkad, and they had the heads of lions and mins of bodies and feet of bird or claw-like, and they're also identified with the same god Nergal of the underworld, right? And again, there's that linkage between the underworld and the Nagas and the seraphim angels and things like that. That is just, you start getting into these different types of connections, and you start to think, hey, there's quite a bit more to this. And, you've also got gods that are appearing like, serpents and lion heads, like Ialdabaoth is depicted with a snake's body and a lion's head, or Demiraj, as some others might classify him. And Mithra of the Zoroastrian, Persian cult was depicted as a lion-headed god with snakes wrapped around him. And so, again, you just get these sort of connections that are continually seemingly interconnected in prehistory, right? Just as you get the same lion men that are recorded in Egypt, on the reliefs in Egypt, and they seem to be some sort of a descendant of the Egyptian warrior goddess Sekhmet, who is depicted also as a lioness god and one of the fiercest warriors, and worshipped as the destroyer. And again, of course, you have the Sphinx and the Tepawi and the Akaru, all of Egypt, that are all related to the lion. So it's almost like there's a group of very powerful angels that have lion-esque attributes that may have created this lion race that, again, it's sparse that's out there, the evidence that's out there. But when I started to put all of those sort of connections together, it just sort of dawned on me that, hey, there might be just two of those. And it's interesting that they're also the king of the beasts. And of course, the dragons were considered, the king of the beasts, or the serpents were considered kings of the beast, before the Eden incident. So again, just a lot of different things. So I thought I'd throw that out there. It might just raise the curiosity of the audience in terms of sort of a wider Nephilim concept.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a fascinating subject to look into, because again, these things are affirmed in the scripture, and though they are mentioned quickly in passing, and most people, unless you're aware of these issues and the topics, you might just glance over it or think it's a metaphorical or symbolic of something that is more poetic than literal. And yet these are the things that once you start to study the other ancient accounts and the other stories, that these kind of things are further elaborated upon and brought up in great detail. And yeah, it's a totally fascinating topic, especially in light of individuals like Berosus and his description of many of these hybrid beings being created by the fallen ones during these ancient times, even centaurs, and half men and men with wings and all these kind of things, as described in Berosus's account before the flood.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because a lot of the depictions of these lion men are very much centaur-like, except that they have the body of a lion as opposed to the body of a horse. And then there's other ones where they've got the heads of a lion. So it's almost like, is there two different kinds of those things that were created out there? Interesting anyways.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up. But anything else of interest recently that you've been looking into or studying?
Not significantly, just sort of, doing the continual sort of work and putting more out there on bloodlines and things like that, and sort of get the people thinking a little bit sort of broader in terms of how we look at the 13 bloodlines of the Illuminati that people like to talk about, and because we just sort of get wrapped into bloodlines that say, whether it's the Rockefellers or the Morgans and the people of North America, or just the European ones, whether it's the Plantagenets or it's the Stuarts, and it's we need to look at, in my opinion, the descending bloodlines from a global perspective as we look towards what is coming at us in the end time. And I sort of, begin that with, that sort of idea, to have people have another look at Daniel 2, because it is a very, very interesting prophecy about, the metallic dynasties.
Right.
And out of that, you get into verse 43. And it's got a very, very cryptic statement where, it says, the kings descending from the metal empires are going to mingle with the seed of men.
Right.
And that is very, very interesting when you look at there's two feet, and it's iron mixing with clay, and then you have the descendants of these royal dynasties that are going to mix with the offspring of men to form the end time world government. And then when we look at the kings of the East, as they're referred to, in the book of Revelation, that these kings are more than a European or just a Western sort of thing. This is a global bloodline and intermixing of bloodlines to form the end time world government. And I think in the West, we look too narrowly at what just is right in front of us, and we're going to miss the bigger picture to a certain degree if we're not careful.
Absolutely. And I want to go, into great depth into the specifically the dragon lineages and the different cultures that have story about them. But before I do, I wanted to ask you if you, since we're talking about the lion men of Moab and, these various hybrid races, if you had ever heard of the cynocephali, and I'll share this. I'll read a little bit about this story and then get you to comment. It says, these are the dog-headed men. It says, most people have heard of werewolves, but few know of the ancient race of dog-headed men, better known as the cynocephali. The cynocephalus was essentially a man with the head of a dog. They could understand language, but had no ability to speak. Though they are sometimes depicted in artwork as being civilized, they were by all reports savage beasts who lived to hunt and to kill. While this may sound like just another mythical creature, there are very good reasons to believe that the cynocephali may have actually existed. Above all of them, these dog-headed men were described in reports by famous explorers such as Christopher Columbus and Marco Polo. Around 400 BC, the Greek physician Clesias wrote the following passage, translated into English. It says, "They speak no language but bark like dogs, and in this manner make themselves understood by each other. Their teeth are larger than those of dogs. Their nails like those of these animals, but longer and rounder. All right, well, we'll pick it up on the other side. We'll be right back, everyone. All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm going to finish this story, and then we'll get Gary to comment. They are extremely just like the rest of the Indians with whom they associate. They understand the Indian language, but are unable to converse, only barking or making signs with their hands and their fingers by way of reply. They live on raw meat, and they number about 120,000. The Cephali living on the mountains do not practice any trade, but live by hunting. When they have killed an animal that rests in the sun, they also rear numbers of sheep, goats, and asses, drinking the milk of the sheep and whey made from it. They eat the fruit of the Sipacora, whence amber is procured, since it is sweet. They also dry it and keep it in baskets, as the Greeks keep their dried grapes. They make rafts which they load with this fruit, together with well cleared purple flowers and 260 talents of amber, with the same quantity of the purple dye and thousands additional talents of amber, where they send annually to the king of India. Just a little bit more here. As far as they exchange the rest for bread, flour, and cotton stuffs with Indians, from whom they also buy swords for hunting wild beasts, bows and arrows, being very skillful in drawing the bow and hurling the spear. They cannot be defeated in war, since they inhabit lofty and inaccessible mountains. Every 5 years, the king sends them a present of 300,000 bows, with many spears and swords and arrows. All right, I'm going to just stop there. But I did put a link in the chat room for those that are interested in reading the full, the full article about this. But have you ever heard of these dog-headed men? And
I've heard of them. I haven't really done a whole lot of research on them. As it pertains to, from the bloodlines or a Nephilim perspective, not convinced it works in that direction, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't either. And
right.
I also think that there's also a connection back to the gods here, because there are dog-like gods. There's a hyena-like dog in the Egyptian pantheon, and I'm trying to think of his name. Is that usually Seth? That's of the underworld, maybe. I can't remember, but there is one dog-shaped god in the Egyptian pantheon, and also there's the interesting account in the Greek mythology between. Could be Seth. Yes.
Yeah. Seth. Mm-hmm.
And in the Greek mythology, there's an individual that tests Zeus, and his name is King Lycaon, Lycaeon of Arcadia, and he is turned into a dog-like being that we would know more as a werewolf.
Right.
And so one wonders whether or not that's part of the connection as well. And again, you get these same type of beings that are showing up in Ovides as well. So there's an interesting connection to it. There's not a lot. I mean, I had a quick look at it many years ago, but I was just hitting some dry holes and not enough information on these sort of dog people. But it is certainly out there on the internet, and it's certainly out there on urban legend. But I guess when you've opened as many rabbit holes as I have in terms of what was going on, anything is possible. Just anything is possible, right?
Right. Yeah, and then the whole thing with lycanthropy and all the stories of the werewolves, there certainly seems to be some kind of connection there. How far and to where it goes back, who knows? But again, Barosas, he talks about the fallen ones, their involvement in modifying and creating a lot of these hybrid races, even in ancient times. But lately, and we're going to go into the dragon lineages, but I wanted to ask you this. Your study of the pre-Adamic, the antediluvian times, and I had read that passage talking about how there were other worlds destroyed, which both you and I, looking into the Hebrew, as far as Genesis chapter 1 verse 2, where it talks about the earth being without form and void, that basically is speaking about it as having become a deserted wasteland and in indistinguishable ruin, that something led to that. And so in my opinion, even in 2 Peter, it's referencing this previous destruction, Jeremiah 4, verse 23, and others. But what was it that in your study of this particular topic that led you to, to really understand, as far as that most certainly the scriptures are affirming that there was this, previous earth age and previous world, that the earth had been created perfect before it somehow became destroyed?
Well, I think you're always sitting in that position where you've got, and not that I trust science, but you've got all of this other stuff going on in science. You've got all of these other religions. You've got all of these other mythologies around the world that are suggesting the world is a little bit older than the 6,000 years. And so, but I didn't really need that to reconcile or have my faith. But when I started looking at, the differences between Gen 1 and Gen 2, and there's a possible gap there. And then in some of the versions of the Bible, it would say that there's two ways to translate that, and that now the earth became voidless and without form. And I'm going, well, what do you mean now? And why is there
Right.
two ways? Why is there two ways to translate that? And that's when I started to dig it back to the Hebrew, because none of the English translations tell you exactly what they're talking about when it's saying it could be translated, two possible ways. So I started to rebuild it through Hebrew, and yeah, there is two distinct ways that you can read that, and it seems more likely that Genesis 1 is not part of Genesis 1-2. Like it happens before that, and now the earth became void, and then you got Psalms 104:30, which I always thought was very, very strange, where it says something to the effect that, when God sends his spirit, he renews the earth, right? And we have that spirit floating over this void and formless earth that's about to renew it in the 6 days of creation. And so I just started to dig into that, and I said, well, you know what? Whether or not one translation is true over another or not, it's not the big deal, but I don't have to be stuck with this chronology from Adam that doesn't seem to make sense with Genesis 1. And then you've got this thing going on in Genesis 1 to 2. So it just sort of opened my eyes to the possibilities without me leaving the Bible in terms of what it's saying.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I do believe that people need to go back to the Hebrew when they're trying to understand the context of certain passages and certain words. And that when you do so, in looking up the various definitions, that one can most certainly be led to clarity on things that seem to be conundrums. And then the other thing with me is that in Isaiah chapter 45, I believe it's verse 18, where he talks about, and also in Second Ezra, talks about it having been created as perfect. And yet, when you read Genesis and then it's destroyed in a destroyed state, why would he create it imperfect and then have to recreate and reform it in the rest of the narrative following Genesis 1 chapter 1 verse 2? Why wouldn't he just create it perfect to begin with? And so all of that really led me to understanding that there was more to what we are being told and what is taught in Sunday school, and that when you really begin to examine it, that this is the story that comes forth.
Well, and further to that, it says in Isaiah that he didn't create the earth in vain. He created it for people to live in. And then when you trace that word, vain back, you're back to Tuhu and Boohoo in terms of voidless and formless, right? So like he didn't create the world that way. It seems like it became that way. And then there's the other thing, particularly when you look at the King James translation of Genesis 1:27 or 28, and it talks about after the people of day 6 being created, that they're to replenish the earth. What do you mean replenish the earth?
Right.
Like how is that possible? Now I know other translations will just say fill the earth, but it's and again you could translate that either way. So you've got some Bibles that are saying you can retranslate or translate the Genesis 1:1 to 1:2 in two different ways, and then you've got the Bible also at different translations translating Genesis 1:28 in two different ways as well. So yeah, it's hard for each of those translations to have it their own way and not say, hey, maybe there's a little bit more here that's going on. And then when you understand that you can't reconcile the Eden account with the day 6 account without running into contradictions, then all of a sudden you start to say, okay, well now there's probably a different creation from the Adam account and the day 6 account as well.
Right.
And if somebody listening who wants more information on this, get a hold of me, and I've got some attachments I can send you that'll break it down blow by blow on both renewal of the earth in Genesis 1:1 to 2, and also all the differences between Genesis 1 and the Eden account on the creation of not only Adam, but the creation order, because it's different in Genesis 2 as well.
Right. Which, in my opinion, is affirmation that these are two different stories, and then the difference in the verb as far as created and or made and then formed, and also with one being done by Elohim, the other by Yahweh Elohim. But
Yeah.
yeah. But there's a question from the chat room with regard to the blood types. Do you know anything as far as the different blood types and how that might tie to different peoples, or the breakdown of all that? Because I've never really looked into or investigated, like with A and AB or O, and how that associates. Any thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, I mean, most people know that there's technically 8 blood types, because there's A, B, AB, and O. And then within that, you have positives in each of those and negatives in each of those. And it's the RH negative bloodline that people tend to look at. Mm-hmm. Now, what we do know about the RH negative bloodline is that it somehow is inserted into the human bloodline at some point in time, and nobody's really sure when, and nobody's really sure how. And of course, there's speculation from different types of beings, whether it's Cro-Magnon or any of the other sort of closely related human forms that science has either created or documented, depending on what your point of view in it, that might have mixed with humans. And the other possibility is back to fallen angels and the Nephilim. Because what happens with this RH negative, it's not a big deal today, because there's drugs that permits people to have babies. But before, recently, in let's say the last generation or so, if you had a positive bloodline and a negative bloodline, the negative bloodline would essentially not permit the baby to be born. It would kill it. And so it's almost like there's 2 races within the bloodline that's almost fighting each other, right? And that's kind of how people are kind of looking at it. And people aren't familiar what the negative designation means. It's just basically you're missing the D antigen, so that's why the minus. And if you have the D antigen, then it's a positive. And there are other antigens as well, and they're all there to sort of protect humans, from bacteria and stuff like that. They're not there to kill a positive baby's fetus, right? It just makes no sense. So that's what the RH negative thing is about. And when you connect that back to with what the Rosicrucians and the Nazis believed in, something called vril, V-R-I-L, about something in the blood that they believe is one of those connections that comes down through history of the genealogy or the bloodlines of the Nephilim, then all of a sudden you start to say, well, maybe there is a connection there. And then when you understand that, the negative bloodline is only about, of all 4 groups, it's only like 15% of the world population, and it's not completely everywhere, then you start to say, well, okay, that, again, is that just somehow coming in, and is that from the bloodlines of the Nephilim and the fallen angels? And then when you understand that, like 40 to 45% of that RH negative bloodline is centered basically in France and in England, and you have all of these bloodlines coming out of these dynasties out of the Middle East to set up the royal dynasties, whom they say and keep their genealogies back in time to the Nephilim and the fallen angels as part of their pedigree. And then when you understand that there's a group, and depending on which study you're looking at, called the Basques, that have an RH negative factor as high as 80%. Some people say 50%. So somewhere between 50 and 80% is RH negative, and by far the strongest concentration in the world. And the Basques lived in southwest France. and in northwest or northeast Spain. Anyways, right along the Spanish and French border. And this is where all of these sort of Gnostic and bloodline groups coalesced after the fall of Judea at after 70 CE. There's this sort of congestion and rising. You have like things rising like the Templars out of there, and you've got the Merovingian dynasty, and you've got the Cathars, and all of this sort of Gnostic concentration that's all brooding in this bloodline sort of stuff that is happening in that same rebellious area. And then you understand, if you get into what the Basques believe about themselves, is that they are the people who resettled after the flood and created the Egyptian post-Diluvian civilization, plus the Mesopotamian post-Diluvian civilization and the Scythian post-Diluvian civilization, and they call themselves Homo Atlantis, and that they have a higher level of ennobled blood, and they consider themselves superior to these bloodlines that are coming back out of the Middle East, and that they had a falling out that caused this sort of diaspora because they were exerting their elitism. All of a sudden, all of this bloodline stuff starts to meld together, and you start to say, hey, maybe there's something to that, as well as with the other sort of allegories that go with the spark of the divine and the gene of Isis and the 1,000 points of light and all the other things that that they like to talk about, that are markers that come down from the gods and the Nephilim.
Very fascinating. Can you also talk about this as far as how the elites, even today, how they intermarry, even at the detriment of, what genetic schizoid natures and, and marrying cousins and half sisters and this kind of thing, how this seems to be prevalent among these elitist bloodlines as well. And then we can, take it into the dragon lineages and your research in some of these ancient cultures.
Yeah, so let's underline that most of these royal families have negative bloodlines. So again, a bit of no coincidence there. And for example, the House of Hanover, House of Windsor that we would know them today, they're basically O negative for the most part. And these royal families all intermarried to keep their bloodlines as pure as possible. And just as the pseudo blue bloods from North America are trying to intermarry with them, whether it's the Rockefellers and some of the other major families, the Heinz family, whomever you want to sort of dig into, are trying to ennoble their bloodlines. Within the pure bloods, they were continually intermarrying to keep that bloodline pure, but it did produce a lot of diseases. And so in the Habsburg dynasty, which was the most prevalent, and probably the Romanov dynasty, where you would have these diseases entering in because they were intermarrying too much with their cousins and sisters and things like that. And maybe not the sisters, that would probably go further back into history, like, coming out of Egyptian or Mesopotamian, right? So just so that people don't confuse when I conflate some of those things at times. And that if you consider World War I was an interfamily civil war, because the Romanovs were cousins with, the Kaisers or the Caesars of Germany, as were the Habsburgs, their cousins and intermarried, as were the kings of England. This was a family feud that turned into a world war fighting for dominance. And that's probably, and King of Spain is all part of this as well. And passing amongst these families are this very interesting title called the King of Jerusalem title, and the King of the Holy Roman Empire sort of goes with the same title as it's being passed on. And it's currently held by the King of Spain today. So these bloodlines and these titles, just as Lionheart, as we mentioned earlier, they're there for a reason, because it reflects their history in all aspects.
Yeah, that's very fascinating. We're almost to break, but when we return, I want to talk about, like psychic energies and that connection to it. We'll be right back, everyone.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And we'll be right back after this message.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Our subject and his kin had been taught by their families and tutors that once upon a time their ancestors had fallen to earth after some cosmic calamity in the time before the garden. He believed that while their ancestral mother was Eve, their ancestral father was not Adam. They believed that they are our humanoid cousins, superior hybrids, half alien and only half human. They once reigned from Olympus and were pharaohs. Whatever the real truths of their history, their belief is the driver of their actions. Being the true believers they are, they will continue to operate in accordance with their belief in the laws of alien Darwinian type survival. That's why they interbreed, to maintain the purity of the bloodline. That's why they secretly meet and connive to pass power between themselves. And that's why they must fool the rest of mankind into wars of self-destruction and debt, so that we may be forever enslaved to their lust on this prison planet, till death do us part. I wanted to get you to, Gary, since we're talking about the bloodlines and tying it to the elites, and if you would, can you talk about also the psychical nature, the extrasensory factor that seems to be also connected to this RH negative factor, and which it seems to also give them the ability to conjure or to interact with these demonic influences more so than, you know, regular, I guess, quote unquote, normal type people, if you want to say that. But yeah, if you would. Gary, you there? Gary, are you there, brother?
I'm here, yes.
Okay.
And I had my mic muted, sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
And yeah, and this RH negative bloodline, they have a lot of interesting characteristics. And this information, you know, that I'll provide comes from what people who have the negative bloodline say about themselves. But just before they do that, because this has a real good tie-in to what you're talking about, is I missed before the break talking about that there's a language that was spoken that was pretty much related to the Basques in Aquitania in southwest France. And that's where Eleanor of Aquitaine comes from, who has two sons that are going to marry into Henry Plantagenet's family, and one of them becomes king, called Richard the Lionheart, which connects back to what we were talking about earlier. So you can see how that high concentration of RH negative bloodline has been infused back even into the Western bloodlines, even though they had a major falling out. Now, what people say in who have the RH negative bloodline, they say they have a higher intelligence. So all of a sudden, you're starting to see this sort of inferior sort of complex that I would say more of the purebloods have than what the average person does, who may not realize that they may have bloodlines that are similar to the purebloods. But 135 plus tends to be kind of the average from the pool, and they have better analytical skills, better intuitive abilities, more psychic abilities, which is what you're talking about. they tend to have larger heads and eyes. And then when you see these pictures going around the internet, like with the Rothschilds and some other people, you might get sort of that kind of imagery, that kind of that elongated skull with some of the purebloods. Lower body temperature, lower blood pressure, higher percentages of blonde and red hair, higher percentages of green or hazel eyes and or blue eyes, better vision and other improved senses, increased sensitivity to light, which is part of that sort of comes out in the vampire allegories from the occult in their bloodlines, subject to more alien abductions and unexplained phenomena, which is another interesting thing. And they also believe they can't be cloned. They don't substantiate why, they just don't believe they can be cloned. So there is this connection that if they do have all of these other abilities, they have, and we're talking to purebloods, not average people here, that they have these higher cognitive abilities, these psychic abilities, it makes it easier for them to talk to fallen angels and demons and people of other dimensions, which again is classic as you become part of the higher organizations, like the Rosicrucians, for example, regularly speak with the people from this realm, and they're called by many different names, from the Celestial Brotherhood to the White Brotherhood to gods to demons to spiritual guides, but it's all sort of part of that upper adept level pure blood culture that they have, that is making use of these higher levels of psychic abilities, if that is indeed the case. But that's what they say.
Yeah, it is fascinating. Fascinating that there's a lot of claims along those lines, and even people that are not part of these elitist groups, but that seem to have this Rh negative factor and blood type, that this is the things that they are asserting to me as well, as far as their extrasensory perception. They're the same with what you said, the abductions and their interactions, whether it's willing or voluntary, that they have a prevalence to interact and to have this demonic influence following them. And that those kind of doors are open for them widely, more so than again regular people or whatever.
Yeah.
But
sure. And let me also say, for the record, because I should have probably said this right out of the gate, is your bloodline or your physical traits don't dictate whether you can be saved or not.
Right.
Right. Yeah. It has nothing to do with that. Everything is still in your choice, and what you decide to do and whether or not you choose to follow God and Jesus or not are really the only qualifications. And this is a spiritual thing that we're talking about, not a physical thing. And we're not of this world, and certainly the bloodlines are. So.
Right. Yeah, fully. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because people do ask me if they are born of these bloodlines, if they can be saved. And of course they can. That when Christ died on the cross, he did so to give us all a chance for forgiveness of sins and to clean the slate for all of us. And so, yes, your actions, your choices, the way you live your life, whether you accept the grace that he has so graciously extended to us all, that all of that, it's more so determines rather than which bloodline you were born into. But
yeah, the only sin you can't be forgiven of is a sin against the Spirit or a blasphemy against the Spirit, the Holy Spirit. So all other things are forgivable.
Right. And also, just so everybody knows, Gary will be joining us tomorrow night, also in a continuation on Truth Frequency Radio. And so we're about to go into some of the research that you've done on the other cultures, Gary, like Japan and China and these different places that have in their mythologies the descent of the supposed dragons or these dragon-like lineages, and that they were the ones that interrelating and intermarrying with human women, that they sired the kings, those royal families that are sitting on the thrones of the world. And I know that you looked into this, and with various different cultures. And so, and I know that you just recently, well, not real recent, but you did a show with John on the Chinese peoples and their royal families, and that was absolutely fascinating. And so, if you would, can you kind of lay some of that out for us, and then we'll, get into greater detail of it on with the rest of this show and next show.
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to say on that is that all cultures around the world have a very, very similar story of prehistory that lines up quite well with what the Bible says, with some interesting sort of nuances and changes, and through a polytheist lens, of course, as opposed to a monotheist lens.
Mm-hmm.
But they tell a very, very similar story of similar types of gods and or fallen angels, as we know about it in monotheism, with very, very similar attributes and looks. And they all have a creation story that begins with. It doesn't matter whether or not you want to call them Nagas or Knuckles out of Central America and the Kishamaya, or the Nagas out of India, and these are these serpent-like beings, or dragons as they're called out of China, and same with the dragons that are in Japan, and you've got a creation story that is basically being told in a similar manner, just as you have different forms of leviathans around the world, in all cultures again. And it doesn't matter which culture you go to. I mean, you can call it Lotan, or you can call it Tiamat, or you can call it things like Nahor. You can also, Yam is another one. Even in Asgard mythology, I think it's Midgardamar, and you've got Apep in the Egyptian mythology, and you got Leviathan and Rahab in the Bible, and there's more names than that, but they're all sort of destroyed after creation, and they're separated to create sky and earth in the polytheist mythologies, which is very similar to what happens in day 6. And just as God destroys the Leviathan in the Bible. So I wanted to preface that, because when we get into what these dragons and serpent gods were, they were really the seraphim angels, right? They're just called different gods around the world. And so when we move into the east through India and into China, these dragons are considered to be the Nagas as well. And the Nagas were wise beings from the heaven. They also had shape-shifting capabilities and could even take human form. No real surprises here from where the Nephilim and Seraphim angel story comes from. They created snake orders and monks and priests. And these Nagas were reptilian type of beings. So they were a snake individual, and specifically the cobra, as it comes out of the Indian mythology, not just a normal snake, but this like the cobra. And that's important because you see that imagery in Egypt as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the female Naga was known as a Naji or Najin. So they had, again, because of the shape-shifting ability, they could take any sex that they wanted to take. And a snake in Sanskrit wouldn't come from Naga, would come from Sarpa. So the Naga, going back to the cobra as part of that whole imagery, is very, very important to understand, and sort of a separation. And so these are the beings that gave civilization to humankind in all of these different cultures. Mm-hmm. So these are the ones that now create the giants, and they're known by many different names. And in the Indian culture, it could be the Daitriya or the Asura, and the Myosi in the Chinese culture. These are the royal families that are being created. These are the kings. These are the nobles. This is the noble class. But this is the same story that is told around the world. And in Chinese prehistory, which is, what you asked me about, you have three what they call sovereigns, and these are dragon sovereigns. And they all have sort of their own individual part in creating prehistory, but out of prehistory and then after the flood, you have a restart, which is kind of really where the Chinese sort of history really gets going with the five emperors, or maybe even a little bit after the five emperors, let's just say starting with about Emperor Yu in about 2200 BC. And out of this comes a family bloodline that is absolutely a common name in China, yes, but it's the power that this family still holds today that is very, very interesting. And that name is Li, L-I, can be spelled L-E-E, L-I-U, several different variations because there's many different dialects to the Chinese languages as it evolved over time. So you have any questions on that, Zen, before I move on?
No, well, not really, but I do want to share this since you had mentioned the Nagas and their connections to the netherworld, that there's a passage in the book of the Secrets of Enoch. He says, I saw the key holders and guards of the gates of hell standing like great serpents, and their faces like extinguishing lamps, and their eyes of fire, their sharp teeth, and I saw all the Lord's works, how they are right, while the works of man are some good and others bad, and in their works are known those who lie evilly. And also in the Testament of Amram, there's a description of a viper, the watcher, and having a viper-like visage, and that he was contending with Michael over the souls of men. And so, all these things are very fascinating with regard to the dragon lineages and all the ancient mythologies which speak about these seraphic angels.
Yeah, and even if you move over to Central America with the Quiché Maya, the Aztecs, and the Inca, you have the feathered serpent and the plumed serpent.
Right.
And when you think about that, and what we're seeing as sort of another analogy, you have dinosaurs now being depicted as having feathers, right?
Right.
So these feathers were part of the wings of these feathered serpents, which is just that imagery of what probably a fallen angel or a seraphim angel would have looked like, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the angelic wings, only with feathers in the physical world, even though they would be opalescent and shining beings, and the serpent face. So this is very, very common and very, very similar to, the Thunderbirds that are in North American mythology, right? So, but again, these gods all have the sort of the same root. And in North America and in Central and South America, it's coming from either an island in the Atlantic or an island in the Pacific, where they believe their descendants came from after the flood, and they were the Snake Clan, of course. No coincidence there. So yeah, this whole ideology of serpent imagery with the seraphim angels is absolutely everywhere. And again, it comes up in Japanese mythology and their creation history, and of course the start of their royal families.
Right.
So in the Chinese scenario, you have Yu the Great, and he kind of founds the Xia dynasty, XIA, around 2200 BC. And Yu is the grandson of Wanzhou, who's the son of Gun. As you go back into some of these gods that they list them in prehistory, and I don't want to name them all because people will get a little bit bored with that, I think. So, but understand that it's this Xia dynasty that's created in 2200 BC that are the people also known as the Huaxia, if I pronounced it correctly. And this was also a variant of where the Li people and tribes come from. And so this is where the beginning of the Li Empire starts to begin, and the Li dynasty starts with the Shah dynasty after Emperor Yu, who they descend out of in about just say 2070. Some people have got them closer to 2000, some through 2100, but in that area, the Shah dynasty will reign till about 600 BC. And then all of the other dynasties that come along from the Shah through the Qing dynasty and the Ming dynasty and the Yuan dynasty, which are the last dynasty, and the Qing dynasty ending in about 1912, all claim bloodline descendancy back to Yu the Great through the Shah dynasty. So it matters not which one, and Li names are prevalent all the way through these dynasties. And in today, I mean, to give an example of some of the important names of Li that are in power today. I mean, there's one of the richest and de facto ruler of Hong Kong is Li Ka-shing. Then you have, of course, Li Peng, who is the president of China today. And you know, if you go through and follow the family connections of the Li dynasty, is they're even involved even after the fall of the imperial dynasties, and they start to infiltrate and be part of the Communist Party to regain control and power. And there's two Lis on the governing council of China today. But they also are partnering after the fall with secret societies because they created the secret societies, and it's been part of their legacy all the way through history. So whether or not it's the Red Spear Society that Li Ta-Chao had ties to during the revolution, who was very close to Mao Zedong, is just one of those societies to keep in mind. But there's also societies that are like the Green Gang Society and the Ko-Ino Hui Secret Society. And they have societies also that are more like the Illuminati organizations or the Freemasonry organizations that we have of today. And the Rockefellers and Freemasons would regularly visit with the secret societies coming out of China, because they're essentially just the same organization, only in the East. And again, that is just a coincidence that I find absolutely mind-boggling. And so you also have organizations like the White Lotus Society and the Hung Society, and the Three United Society, and the Triads or the Mafia is part of the secret societies that the Lees still run, and they still have control over the Triads and are the leaders wherever these sort of branch organizations are located around the world. And so the organization that would be probably the most closest to Freemasonry would be the Wutsu Society, which means the five, or the five ancestors, or the five gods that we talked about a little bit earlier. And it's almost identical to the Freemasonic Society.
Yeah, all of this, in my opinion, when you go back far enough, you see a lot of these connections, and then in the way that the secret societies that they are connected to these dragon clans and these dragon people, that there is these affiliations that they were established by them in order to create the structure which they basically ruled through the priesthoods and the kings and the various the rulership that was established all around the world, and that even to this day that structure is in place. And the Freemasons, the secret societies which are connected, the Brotherhood of the Serpent, the Dragon societies, and all these different serpent, as far as the symbology and the different secret societies that have connection to that, it all links back. In
Yeah.
ancient times, the same thing.
It is, and this is just a very small excerpt out of the New Age magazine in September 1964, published by the Supreme Council of the 33rd Degree, reported by Brother Morris B. de Pass, master of 33rd Degree Master of Kadash of the Peking Scottish Rite Bodies, and his annual report included the following story in regard to the Wutsu Society. During the past year, I had the pleasure of meeting an old China Han, himself a Scottish Rite Mason, who, learning of my China background, asked me if I had knowledge of an old Chinese organization similar to Masonry. And of course, that's the Wutsu Society that I had mentioned earlier. And the Society of Five Ancestors is another name for it. It was an eastern branch of the movement that developed in the Western countries into Freemasonry. So they're actually believing in China that they sent that east, whether that's true or not. But this is the communication that goes on between these organizations. And it's all connected to the bloodlines, just as the bloodlines organized all of these secret societies after the fall of Templars, who they also organized in the West, which would be the Illuminati and the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons and the Royal Society and the Jesuits, and putting the Rothschilds into business to replace the banking arm.
All right, we'll be right back, everyone, for a final segment.
100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
When the Chitauri arrived in Africa, they told our people that they were gods and that they were going to give us human beings great gifts on one condition: we had to worship them and accept them as our creators. Some told our people that they were our elder brothers and that this earth had produced them generations ago. They said they had come back to the green womb of their mother and that they were going to make us into gods. Most of the time you will find it being said that these great gods, especially the ones that came out of the sky, they were not human, but were scaly creatures which live most of the time in the mud or the water, creatures of an extremely frightening and hideously ugly appearance. Some say that these creatures were like crocodiles with crocodile-like teeth and jaws, but with large round heads. Some say that these creatures are very tall beings with snake-like heads, set on long, thin necks and very long arms and very long legs. They are those that tell us that these gods who came from the skies traveled through the land in magical boats made of bright metal, silver, copper, or gold. Gary?
Yeah, another great little excerpt that you had there. And I wanted to maybe continue on with some of the influence of the Chinese Li family. I mean, they spread their bloodlines sort of all through Southeast Asia and even over into Japan. And just as sort of one quick example, there's a fellow by the name of Dangun, who was the founder of the Korean dynasty, and of course he connects back to the Lord of Heaven. Huanong, which is like Wang Di out of the three sovereigns of the Chinese prehistory story. And so you have that descendancy coming on from Wang Di, which produces Emperor Yu, which produces the Washi and the Li dynasty. So again, you have the bloodlines that are coming down from there as well. And then you have the Yamato dynasty, which is sort of the longest existing dynasty in the world today, that kind of takes them back to, in their mythology and genealogies, back to about 660 BC. But legitimately, they can't really prove beyond about 200 BC. And at that time, there's a fellow that lands in Japan named Zufu, and he takes over and starts the Japanese dynasty, which many believe is the Yamamoto dynasty. And what's interesting about Zufu is he connects back as being a priest and a noble of the Chinese court of the trying to think of which dynasty that was, of the Qin dynasty, the Qin dynasty, or circa 220 BC to 200 BC. And he is of a royal bloodline that actually goes back in history to these early dragon type serpentine creators who create the first noble families as being descending and I'm just trying to make sure I don't screw up some of the details on this, is that he was known as the Zhou, was a state that is established that is ruled over by the Zhou kings, and eventually they're overrun down by the Zhou dynasty. But they're coming out of the same peoples that created in the same time frame as the Li family. So you have this descendancy of dragon bloodlines that are covering all of Southeast Asia. Just as you have in Thailand, you've got Nagas. In Malaysia, you've got Nagas. They're known sometimes by a little bit different name, but the most famous ones are in Cambodia, right? The Nagas that are recorded or that are sculpted into the temples of Angkor Wat. Yeah. So, and these are the ones that they believe in the Cambodian mythology came from India. They were chased away and out of India at some point in time. And in India, in Indonesia, these Nagas, they symbolize the netherworld and the underworld again. So you have this sort of connection that keeps going around to the world, and the Nagas there again are based on the cobra imagery, and then you also have this Naga people of India, that is very interesting set of people, and they're very much we're a warrior class of people. With sort of conical headgear. They're very much into feathers. They had like canine teeth. So there's all of this sort of legacy coming down of the Nagas in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, all of this is really fascinating. I wanted to ask you if you had gotten a chance to look at the books that I sent you, the Ophiolateria, which is basically worship of the serpent, and then the other one by Reverend John Bathurst Dean on the worship of the serpent, and how they basically trace all of that worldwide and tie it together with the biblical revelation in Genesis of the Nakash, the Nakash, the beguilement of Eve, and also the Revelation 12, the dragon, that ancient serpent that deceiveth the whole world. That there are, all the worship of the serpent in the antediluvian times all ties together with even what we see in the scriptures with the connection to the dragon and Satan and all that.
Well, yeah, because in Isaiah 6, we have the seraphim, and these were fiery serpent-like angels. And, we get that imagery coming back and intermixing with Nakash in the story, I think it's in Numbers 21, about the Israelites in the desert where they're attacked by these venomous snakes. And Nakash is used for every application as you take that back to Hebrew, except once where it's the image that Moses puts on the spear that is going to cure the Israelites and protect them from these venomous snakes. And then the word seraph is used, or seraphim. And so again, you have this connection of that serpentine image back to the seraphim angels, just as Lucifer, Satan, in Revelation 12 is described as the serpent and the dragon. And also in Deuteronomy 8, you have these, in the King James Version as it translated, you have these fiery serpents. And serpent
Right.
goes back to Nakash, but the word before it, fiery, goes back to seraphim. And again, just sort of binds them together back in Hebrew.
Right. Right. Yeah. And again, when you understand and you see, you recognize these connections, then it makes sense how as far as the mythological record ties in together with what is revealed within the inspiration of the word and the gospel, and that all these things are tied together, which, in my opinion, having this understanding also helps us to understand what we are dealing with and contending with as world, and why these blood royal elites, those sitting on the thrones of the world, are said to be at some point tied to reptilian shapeshifting, and even the consumption of blood, cannibalism. That all these ancient practices are still ongoing today.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just absolutely no coincidence. And to have dragons and lions all over their imagery is
Right.
absolutely, unaccountable. And, it's been that way right from the beginning of time, that lions and dragons and serpents and cobras are the imagery of the royal houses and the royal family.
The
And what's also
heraldry,
yeah. Then what's also interesting back in the Bible to connect serpents and Satan all back together is you look at Luke 10:18, and it says, I beheld, this is Jesus talking, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. And then immediately he goes on and says, behold, I give you power to tread on serpents and scorpions.
Yes, right, exactly.
and I just don't believe that that's a coincidence.
No, not at all. And then there's a verse that speaks about, that we should be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. And so, yeah, those kind of things, all connected, in my opinion, to this underlying truth, which, not a lot of people recognize, and that certainly is not taught in Sunday school or acknowledged by most pastors, preachers, and that kind of thing.
It's always passed over. It's like they're just not wanting to deal with it.
Yeah,
And
no doubt.
it's just crazy.
Right.
And even on the secular side or historical side, I mean, we have these Aryans that are connected to the Titans and to the giants of prehistory, and these are the same people that are settling into the Middle East after the flood, from a time period perspective, and settling into India and taking this whole idea of the Nagas and the serpents and everything further east, and yet nobody ever makes that connection. And then you have people like the Nazis tying themselves back to the Aryans, who they believed was their sort of Asgard sort of Norse mythology back to Thule, right?
Right.
And it's just, and nobody ever wants to tie that stuff together.
Right. And I know that, because I've been writing and talking about these things since 2010 was the publication of Lucifer, Father of Cain. But I know that, when, people, especially back then, they were like, you are just nuts, talking about reptilians and shapeshifters and dragons and all that as far as the mythology. What did you really think when you first came to recognition that this was the truth of, as far as the mythological record, and also that of the biblical narrative? How, I mean, did you even want to go there?
No, it was stunning,
Right.
frightening. I just walked away from it for a while. It just,
Uh-huh.
this was the rabbit hole I didn't want to be in.
Yeah.
Because it may not have been a rabbit hole, it might have been a snake hole.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but once you accept that that's a possibility, and you start to accept the information from around the world, and then you look at descriptions of the offspring of them, like Anakim being long necks, and you have all of these other depictions of the Anunnaki being called serpents, and you have descriptions coming out of Atlantis that these were, again, serpentine-like beings that were at Atlantis, and you have the North American tribe saying, like the Hopi saying that they came from the White Snake clan that was off an island in the Atlantic, and the Mayans have a very similar. I mean, you just, after a while, there's just so much information that suggests that that was true. I guess you just kind of start to accept that as normal after a while, but certainly not in the beginning. I mean, it was numbing, mentally numbing.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the way it was for me. But like you, doing the research and being confronted with it over and over and over at every turn of the way, you just have to accept truth in whatever form it decides to take and reveal itself to you, and you just have to move on and acknowledge it, accept it, and just go with it. And so but Gary, I wanted to give you a chance again to give out your website contact information, your Facebook blog, things like that, and then we'll get final comment from you, and then I've got an announcement before we go.
Okay, so people can follow me on Facebook under Gary Wayne. Also, I have 2 Genesis 6 conspiracy pages that I have attached to my Gary Wayne timeline. And you can also follow me and look for my postings on a new group that has been set up called Gary Wayne Genesis 6 Conspiracy. You can follow me on Twitter at Gary Wayne63, at Gary Wayne63. You can also go to my website, genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6, the number 6, and you can contact me through the website. You can also link into my social media off of there. You can read some of the excerpts off the book. You can order a signed copy from the book. You can also link into barnesandnoble.com and amazon.com if you wanted to buy from them. And you can also link into the Kindle version from there as well.
Excellent. All right, real quick, I just wanted to announce that Laurel, my sometimes co-host, she told me that Mark Sargent and Patricia Steer, that they are discussing the debate that both Dr. Stephen Pidgeon and I are going to be having August 5th and 6th here in Duluth, Georgia. There's been a website set up. It's called globalversusflatearth.com, and that the conference tickets, there's 150 openings, and that once those tickets are sold out, we will not be able to seat any more people. So please go there and set up your rooms, and there's a discount for the conference as well. It's $25 for both days, and it will be featured. Laurel Austin will be speaking with Yana Ben-Nun of Israeli News Live. Dr. Stephen Ben-Nun will be hosting and kind of moderating along with Yana. And then, like I said, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, the one that compiled the Sefer.net, the Sefer, and I will be deliberating and talking about this on those particular days. And so please do join us and check out their other, the show that Mark and Patricia are doing, where they're talking about this as far as debate. Gary, I'm going to give you a chance for a final comment. And also just wanted to ask you really quick, if you had looked at with regard to this particular topic at all, or just not examined it as of yet or anything.
Flat Earth versus global Earth. Yeah, I'm agnostic on it. It is one that I tend not to comment on, and I don't have a position on it. I'm agnostic on it. For me, it's a significantly large, extraordinary large subject, and being a contrarian, I don't tend to accept what other people say, so I have to do the research myself, and I think I'd probably be submerged for 2 to 3 years doing a proper job of researching it, which I just don't have the time right now to spend on doing that. So it's not like I'm dodging it. It's just that, I'm respectful of the positions and the references in the Bible for flat Earth, but yet also have some questions. And until I were to research that properly, Not an area that I'm wanting to go down at this point. I think I've got something that I'm doing right now that's very, very, very important. I don't want to get sidetracked on that.
Yeah, I don't blame you, and it does take dedication if you're gonna go down that rabbit hole. And so, can you hint on what you are working on, and or can you talk about any of that? And also, I want to give you a chance for final comment. We've got 4 minutes remaining.
Well, I continue to work a little bit on another book that moves off into a different direction. But it's certainly not going to be published this year. But it's going to have some history in it, and it's based on the lost tribes and the impact that the awakening of those lost tribes will have in the end time, and how you need to sort of understand prophecy from both the Judah perspective and the Israel perspective to understand prophecy properly.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Very cool. So maybe next year then?
Hopefully, if I can get some quality time to work on it.
Yeah, I understand how.
I'm probably about a third of the way through it, so.
Well, that's great. That's great. How much is that? Is that like already 400 pages? Just.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm not going to have a book as big as this last one, but yeah, I'm over 200 pages into it. But it's going to be reduced down to a smaller size for when I go to publish. So.
Most excellent. Well, that's great. We're looking forward to it. I know that people are most certainly interested in your follow-up work, and with the caliber of your first publication and the release of Genesis 6 Conspiracy, that a lot of people are looking forward to it and will be just absolutely
terrific. If I have time, there's a couple of word association connections here to the Naga and the Serpent thing I'd like to do if I can.
Please. You got a couple minutes.
Yeah, so I mean, most people are, we've been using the word dragon quite a bit, and connecting that to serpent. And in antiquity, the serpent and the dragon were considered the same thing, and in some cultures, even the crocodile. But I don't want to confuse people at this point. So if you go back into Sumeria, they used to call their kings and some of their demigods Uz-Magal and Uz-Magal, which meant serpent and king and gods in Sumeria. And so the serpent ideology goes right all the way back to those old and ancient kings. And the word dragon actually, comes out of from what we know today, out of Greek as draconia and drakon, meaning serpent. So again, connecting those things together. And just as the holy crocodile in Egypt was known as Draco, and in Latin, dragon, Draco is Latin for dragon. So anytime you hear drakon, Draco, draconian, dragon, Dracula, because the A makes that son of a dragon, Dracul. And the other thing is that Draco and Draconto actually means to watch, as in seraphim watcher.
Excellent. I'm glad that you brought that up. And these word studies, again, it just gives you so much more insight into the actual context of what we're talking about, the topic and the issues. And so thank you for bringing that forth. And don't forget to join us tomorrow evening, everybody. We will be coming to you live at 9 p.m. on Truth Frequency Radio. The name of the show is Secrets Revealed, and it will be a follow-up on the topic that we were talking about this evening. If anybody has questions or anything that they'd like to bring up to Gary, contact me on Facebook.